Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Hopes of a US market surge are dashed as Wall Street's main indexes open lower than the day before. US and Russian officials meet in Turkey for diplomatic talks, but the US says Ukraine is off the agenda. Meanwhile, defence ministers from 30 countries gather at the Coalition of the Willing summit as the UK pledges more military support for Ukraine. And freed after 12 years in jail, US citizen Ksenia Karlina is finally home after a prisoner exchange between the US and Russia. To our top story, and Wall Street's main stock indexes are down today, bucking the trend across European and Asian markets who've had better days in the market. The Dow Jones dropped 1.6% upon opening, whilst the S&P 500 lost 2.3%. The tech-heavy Nasdaq 100 was down nearly 3%. It comes as US inflation fell more than expected in March, easing to 2.4%. Earlier today, President Trump posted his delight at the inflation news. We can now join Hunter S. Gaylor, Republican strategist and president and co-founder of Spencer Pruitt. A pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much. So, Donald Trump's tariffs, are they the work of a mastermind or of a maverick?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a maverick or a mastermind. I think what we're seeing is an America First policy. I think it's the Trump trade reset. I don't think we're witnessing a retreat. I think we're witnessing a recalibration. And I think by President Trump pausing tariffs globally is not a sign of weakness, but it's a very strategic move to isolate, in this particular case, Beijing, and stabilize our global partners.
So, Hunter, as I said earlier, the US markets are down while indexes across Asia and Europe rallied. Are investors spooked over the mixed messages and the uncertainty coming out of the White House?
I don't think so because, at the end of the day, free trade without fairness is a surrender in slow motion. I think what investors are seeing is there's going to be consequences for cheaters, and I think we're redefining fair trade. So I think there is an adaptation that's happening, not resisting. I think smart investors are being able to follow the market up massively yesterday, down today. This is a retaliation. It signals panic, not power for China, but their economy is far more export reliant than ours. So what Trump is doing with this 10% universal levy, it's the new normal for reciprocity. And I think that's important. And very smart, shrewd investors are seeing that, and they're planning long-term, not short-term.
Cheaters, who do you mean by cheaters? Is that China that you're referring to, or which other countries would you include in that name?
I would mainly say China right now. I mean, what you're seeing is the U.S. drawing the line, right? And the world will see consistency, and that's when market flows. By keeping China under a 125% tariff regime while pausing global levies, Trump is sending a two-part message. One, allies are welcome, but China's economic warfare ends here, and that's the line in the sand. So when I say we're redefining free trade and there's consequences for cheaters, China is at the top of that list. Why? We saw Kevin O'Leary talk about it the other day on CNN, where he said, look, China doesn't play by the rules. They've been a part of this global economics. They steal IP. They're beating out us in manufacturing. They're the closest economic competitor we have. But remember, America is still the largest economy in the world, and we're one of the largest consuming economies in the world. And that's a bad news for China. So they either play by the rules and be fair and stop taking advantage of really our economic system. They're smart, but they've been cheating. We can't sue them. We own businesses that operate all around the world. I can't go after China in their court system. So they need to play by the global the global position that if they're going to play in America, they need to play by the rules. So that's our standpoint on this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. China would obviously disagree with that in many senses, but you have called this a high-stakes game of economic poker. But China is just not blinking right now. They're standing as firm as the US is, saying we have no fear of a trade war against selfish Trump. But where really does this leave the world's biggest economies? At the moment, you said they are, so dominant. This is concerning because this will have ramifications for the rest of the globe.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's very difficult to compete with China. Let's just call it for what it is. I mean, I'm an American first, individual, but I also, I always like to say I was born on a day. It just wasn't yesterday. It's very hard to compete with the manufacturing strength of China and the low cost of manufacturing and the low cost of labor. And so, as any entrepreneur, any smart entrepreneur knows or business person knows, if I can lower my cost of labor and I can increase my profit, then I'm going to go there. That's why you're seeing Vietnam, you're seeing Beijing, you're seeing Guangzhou, you're seeing all of these companies that massively, make and manufacture, from the plastics to, I mean, look at the iPhone. I mean, it might have been designed in California, but it's manufactured in China. And so you're seeing all of these things that's going to, listen, America's gonna hurt for a little bit. Now, there's the people that really, I call it the Walmart shopper. That's of no disrespect to anyone, but it's the lower income individuals that shop at these places that are buying products largely made and manufactured in China. They're going to feel a little bit of this hurting. But from a U.S. perspective, this is, in my opinion, strategic decoupling, not isolationism, right? So what the media calls a trade war is actually just a global reordering. So what I believe Trump is doing is forging a new economic map. Less reliance on our adversaries and more resilience with our partners. And I think that's what we're starting to see here.
And Amazon CEO, actually just picking up on a point that you said customers should start preparing to pay more due to Trump's tariffs. We know China is home to around half of Amazon's sellers and also manufacturers for things like Shein and Temu. You touched on it there, but Hunter, is America actually capable of producing these products right now at a low cost? Or are you prepared for Americans just to be paying more because you're not there in the industrial side of things?
Well, look, you're absolutely correct. I think the real question we have to ask ourselves is an internal question. Our population in the United States is a little over 350 million. Okay, China's 1.2 billion, India 1.2 billion, member of BRICS, right? And so until we actually increase our internal labor force, our internal manufacturing capabilities here, and actually get a generation that wants to work, that's kind of what we see as the problem. We don't have the manpower to be able to produce at these low costs like China does. It just doesn't. We just don't have the manpower, and that's because of a population. That's because of a population growth problem in the United States. Being that we're a $35 trillion plus market in the United States with consumption and more. Quite frankly, China is getting close, but I think in the economic reality, everyday consumer items, yes, people need to be prepared to pay more. But when you look at core industries, okay, not just economics, but their national security pillars, keeping a 25% tariff ensures that domestic resilience in sectors critical to sovereignty, steel, aluminum, auto tariffs, they're going to be here to stay, and that's for a reason.
Hunter S. Gaylor, Republican strategist and president and co-founder of Spencer Pruitt. Thank you for your insights this evening. It's been very interesting to have you on the show.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
Now, delegation teams from the US and Russia have arrived in Istanbul today to discuss diplomatic ties between the West and Moscow. The meetings take place at the Russian consulate in Turkey's capital. They come amidst Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has prompted the freezing of diplomatic property. Russia's new ambassador to Washington, Alexander Dershowitz, will be joined by his Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. The U.S. State Department has confirmed that Ukraine discussions are not on the agenda. We can now go live to Washington to speak to our correspondent there, Nick Harper. Nick, thank you for joining me. So what do we know so far about today's talks?
Well, Leigh Ann, there seems to be some positive noises coming out of these talks. US officials were reportedly inside the Russian consulate in central Istanbul for about 6 hours in total. Out of the back of that, the State Department has said that there was a constructive approach to these negotiations, and they say that they have made progress towards the normalizations of relations between the US and Russia. Remember, this is a very different strategy from the Trump administration compared to the past Biden administration. Under President Biden, it was all about keeping Russia at arm's length, making it a pariah on the world stage. But with Donald Trump now in the Oval Office, the US is very much trying to reforge those ties with Moscow, to normalize them, all as a way to try and work towards a peace deal on the conflict in Ukraine. We've also heard from the Russian delegation, the Russian ambassador, saying there was a positive atmosphere that allowed both sides to move forward in resolving this task set by the presidents of the two countries to normalize the relations and try and work on the diplomatic missions for both countries.
Nick, do we know why Ukraine is off the agenda?
The State Department said earlier this week on Tuesday that Ukraine would not be part of discussions. And I think really this is all about trying to move ahead between working out relations between the US and Russia. That was something that they tried to do in February's meeting. There was a fear at that time that Ukraine was being excluded from any discussions about trying to resolve a peace agreement in Ukraine. Various European allies were also concerned that they didn't have a seat at the table, as was the case back in February. The US is saying, look, this meeting is all about just trying to work things out with Moscow before we then move on to the stage of working out a peace deal in Ukraine itself.
So, Nick, this isn't the first time the US and Russia have actually met. As you said, the last meeting was in February, focused on conditions for each other's country's diplomats after the expulsion of each other's representatives. Do you think this will be something that will also be discussed?
It has been, and it's something that has made news so far. Off the back of this meeting, we're told that there were 3 particular areas that the two sides talked about more widely, looking at the way that they work in that diplomatic sphere and how their diplomats can work in both countries. So they spoke about the credentialing for diplomats. Both the US and Russia have said up until now it's often difficult for their diplomats to get credentials in each other's countries. Also, Russia has found it difficult during the Ukraine conflict to actually pay their diplomats because Moscow has been cut off from many Western financial institutions. And a big sticking point for the United States, they are concerned about an existing Russian policy that's still in place, prohibiting the employment of local staff. The US says that that makes it very difficult for them to staff up their diplomatic mission in Moscow. And both sides also saying that they have had reports from their diplomats in each other's countries of various levels of coercion and various levels of intimidation. So they're trying to sort out those diplomatic things as part of this idea of normalizing relations.
Nick Harper in Washington, thank you so much for joining me. Let's take a look at other stories making the headlines today. US pediatricians say the current fight against measles has been harmed by a forceful government advocacy for vaccinations. Medical experts say parents have been left feeling confused about unproven treatments and statements. Since January, the US has had more than 600 known cases and 2 children have died in Texas. Hezbollah have said they are ready to enter talks with the Lebanese government. The Iran-aligned group wished to discuss national defense strategies as well as the removal of Israeli troops from Lebanon's territory. Lebanon's President Joseph Aoun will reportedly start talks with Hezbollah regarding its weapons supply. Now, Andrew Tate has been accused of pointing a gun in a woman's face and threatening her, according to court documents. The woman is one of 4 suing the influencer. Another alleges Tate threatened to kill her. Tate denies the claims, calling them a pack of lies and gross fabrications. And King Charles and Queen Camilla have left Italy after earlier meeting with Pope Francis at the Vatican as part of their trip to Rome. Buckingham Palace said the King and Queen were delighted the Pontiff was well enough to host them and to have had the opportunity to share their best wishes in person. Now, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, has met with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Washington. Their meeting comes ahead of President Trump's official visit to Riyadh next month. The discussions between Prince Faisal and Rubio included Saudi's diplomatic efforts in Gaza and the ongoing peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. The US thanked Saudi Arabia for its cooperation and reiterated the importance of US-Saudi relations. I'm now joined by Al Arabiya's geopolitical security analyst, Riad Kahwaji. Riad, always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. So, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister has met Marco Rubio in Washington. As unrest does continue across the Middle East, what topics have dominated these talks?
Most likely, topics dominating these talks would be the big armada now gathering along the shores of the Gulf and the Red Sea. First of all, dealing with this Houthi threat. As we remember, Houthis were a source of threat to Saudi Arabia. Now there is a fragile ceasefire in the country. However, we have this push by the US today to get the Houthis to reopen the strait. At the same time, we have the threat of possible action against Iran. That's also a big cause of concern to the whole region. In addition to the situation in Gaza, the continued Israeli operation, the war in there, the suffering that's being brought on the people in that strip has been of a huge problem to everybody. So I think on security side, these would be like the top issues. However, Saudi Arabia and the US have a lot of things from investments, partnerships, projects. There's a lot of things on the table between the two, especially with President Trump is scheduled to make his first visit during his new term now in office.
Riad, actually, the US and Iran are due to hold the first talks in years, and that's coming on Saturday to try to reach a new deal over Iran's nuclear program. You just mentioned the Houthis there to me. How vital are these discussions right now for the region?
It's vital for everything in the region. Iran has got its hands in every single problem in the region, whether it is in Yemen or Syria or Iraq or Lebanon. Iran is everywhere. So for a long time, the Arab Gulf countries have been telling or pushing the international community, the US, the Europeans, to include Iran's actions in the region in addition to Iran's nuclear program on the table for the discussions to bring an end for Iran's behavior in the region. These talks, and everybody is looking forward that these talks will not just be about the nuclear program, but will also take in consideration Iran's proxies. Because if that issue is resolved, then we're going to see a big change situation in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Iraq. There's a lot of change with more stability in the region. That's why everybody is putting a lot of hope of that these talks reaching somewhere, because the failure of these talks would definitely increase tremendously the possibility of a military showdown between the US and Israel on the one side and Iran on the other. And this is bad news for the whole region.
Yes, absolutely. How likely do you think a military showdown is, though?
Well, this depends on the Iranian perception of the situation, whether Iran still believes that they can play their old games, try to talk only about some modifications, some measures on the nuclear program, but keep everything else, which is now the US is saying, no, there are three things that should be added. There should be the ballistic missile program, has to be some limitations on it. There has to be also an end to Iran's proxies, so change of behavior. And here we're talking about the nuclear program, where some are pushing for dismantling the whole program, and some are saying just ending the enrichment portion of it. Iran is looking just to focus on one issue, which is to put some limitations on their enrichment. And here we could have a problem. If the Iranians insist on not giving up or discussing the whole package, we could see a serious problem. And we could see a quick escalation towards a military action, as everybody has expected and warned of, from the Europeans to the Russians. Everybody is saying that the chances of a war this time around is much better than ever been before.
Let's just shift gear back to something that Donald Trump said earlier this week. He basically said he's always said he'd like the war in Gaza to stop, and he said this could happen relatively soon, Riad. But would you agree with the president's view? Because it doesn't seem to be moving that way at the moment.
I think President Trump, according to the Israeli media, gave Netanyahu a piece of his mind in this last Oval Office meeting, that President Trump was clear, was very forceful in stressing the need to bring this war to an end within a few weeks and to have all the hostages released. That's why many believe that the press conference was canceled, because Netanyahu did not want to hear this or to make this go out public, because it's going to cause Netanyahu a problem at home with his right-wing ministers. Because if it came out that he will have to end the war within, and he has like 3 or 4 weeks to do this, this is going to might end up disbanding his coalition back home. Some of the right-wing ministers have threatened that if Netanyahu ends the war in Gaza, they're going to quit the government, and this will lead to the government losing majority in the Knesset. And this is what apparently the Israeli media is now talking about or expecting, that we're going to see a shift and a change in the strategy inside Gaza.
And if we just go back to Trump, he's actually planning to visit Saudi Arabia, they say as early as May, and that's to sign an investment agreement. What more do you know about his visit to the region?
Saudi Arabia is going to be one of the biggest partners, business partners, economic partners to the United States during the Trump administration. This has been announced already, talking about investments in the range of $1 trillion and above. For Trump, this is music. The U.S., especially in the current circumstances, badly need this sort of a relationship with a major international player like Saudi Arabia. So I think President Trump has a lot high expectations from this visit, and Saudi Arabia is also has high expectations of its relationship with the U.S., of bringing about more stability, more business, more technology to the kingdom.
Riad Kahwaji, Al Arabiya's geopolitical security analyst. Always fascinating speaking to you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services will screen immigrants' social media for evidence of anti-Semitic activities. The policy, which goes into effect immediately, affects those applying for permanent residence, foreign students, and those associated with education institutions. The Department of Homeland Security believes it will protect the U.S. from extremists. Turkish police have detained 2 opposition journalists in Istanbul as part of an investigation into alleged threats and blackmail. Timur Soykan and Murat Ariel are both known for their investigative reporting and have been critical towards government policies and institutions. The amount of electricity needed to power the world's data centers could double in the next 5 years. That's according to an international energy report. It's believed the increase is down to the development and use of AI. And a source close to the Universal theme park set to open in the UK in 2031 has revealed the brands which could appear at the park. James Bond, Paddington and Lord of the Rings are just a few of the well-known franchise being discussed. Rides and attractions related to Harry Potter are not expected to be included. Defence ministers from 30 countries have gathered in Brussels today for another Coalition of the Willing meeting. The talks, hosted at NATO's headquarters, are spearheaded by the UK and France, have discussed proposals for a so-called reassurance force in Ukraine to guarantee a post-conflict peace deal with Russia. It comes as Russian drones attacked Kyiv and Molokhovia overnight, injuring at least 12 people. We can now go live to Brussels to speak to our correspondent, Pablo Gutierrez. Pablo, thank you for joining me this evening. The UK Defence Secretary, John Healey, will announce more military support for Ukraine. What's his message been to other allies which are attending the summit?
Well, the focus of the meeting will be to find a way to increase pressure on Russia. And that is why this meeting is so important. We know that this coalition of the willing has vowed to up military spending and help Russia and help the Ukraine at this moment, a moment where the country is embattled and it's subject to constant drone attacks. So this meeting, which is by the 32 member states of NATO, plus other nations that have signed up, will be crucial to determine how to proceed in the future and set up what you mentioned at the beginning, some sort of a peacekeeping force once the conflict is over.
The Coalition of the Willing does not include the US. How do you think this announcement is going to go down in America as they continue to push for a quick ceasefire deal?
Well, one of the things that U.S. State Secretary Marco Rubio said recently was that the United States has no appetite to engage in endless negotiations. We know already its stance in relationship to the Ukraine conflict and how they've been trying to reach a deal. Recently, the Kremlin mentioned that they do not support the way that the United States has proposed a peace plan so far. So it remains to be seen what the effect will be once this meeting concludes tomorrow here in Brussels, and how much will the United States be able to recommit to the protection of Ukraine.
Overnight, Russia fired 145 drones targeting at least 6 regions of Ukraine, injuring at least 12 people. Has this prompted a new wave of support from the UK and Europe?
And the support for this coalition of the willing is primarily coming from the UK and from France. They are the tips of the spear, per se, to gather as much possible support so that Ukraine has the military means to continue defending itself. We know that for now, the support has been there, but since the United States decided to limit and to pressure both parties to reach a peace deal, Europe is now stepping into the forefront and trying to become a more significant player than it already is in the defense of Ukraine.
Earlier today, the EU announced a 90-day tariff pause, responding to President Trump's 90-day pause, which, of course, he announced last night. Are European leaders hoping to strike a better deal with the US?
Well, right now, it's basically a wait-and-see scenario. We know that the decisions that have been coming from Washington in regards to these trade agreements are from one moment to the other. And for now, the European Union, and since this trade conflict really erupted, they have taken a path where they are seeking negotiation over confrontation. So for now, the tariffs that the European Union has suspended for 90 days signal this willingness to meet Washington at the table. We know that here in Brussels, there is already a team prepared. They're ready to get on a plane and fly to Washington, D.C. to begin these talks. But it all depends right now on Washington's next move, on President Trump's administration next move. And but the Commission President said that this is a good sign, it's a good step forward, but she's also cautious, mentioning that if these talks are not to their satisfaction, then these tariffs that were signed on yesterday, they were voted on yesterday, a 26-1 vote, then they will come into effect. And they are scheduled to be placed in three different times. They were supposed to start on April 15, then in May, and after that on December of this year, at the end of the year.
Pablo Gutierrez in Brussels, thank you so much for joining us. Now, a Russian-American citizen who was serving a 12-year prison sentence in Russia has been released today as part of a prisoner swap between Moscow and Washington. Ksenia Karlina was found guilty of treason in a Russian court, accused of donating money to a US-based charity that provided humanitarian aid to Ukraine. The CIA Director John Ratcliffe has said, "I'm proud of the CIA officers who worked tirelessly to support this effort, and we appreciate the government of the UAE for enabling the exchange." Let's take a look at the top business news now. Chinese companies selling products on Amazon are preparing to hike prices for the US or quit the market due to unprecedented tariff hikes. That's according to the head of China's largest e-commerce association, following Donald Trump's increasing tariffs on Chinese exports to 125%. China is home to around half of Amazon's sellers and also manufactures for Shein and Temu. Now, Alphabet's Google unit is partnering with the largest electrical grid operator in North America to roll out artificial intelligence technologies aimed at getting new power supplies connected even faster. The collaboration with PJM Interconnection is the first time AI would be used to manage an interconnection queue. Electricity demand has been rising as big tech builds more data centers to both train and deploy AI. Turning to the sports news now. Barcelona has thumped visitors Borussia Dortmund 4-0 in their Champions League quarter-final first leg on Wednesday. That's after Robert Lewandowski scored twice against his old club to earn his team a sizable lead ahead of next week's return visit to Germany. The Masters is underway on day one in Augusta, with defending champion Scottie Scheffler teeing off against Rory McIlroy, who needs a win to complete the career Grand Slam among the late starters. If Rory McIlroy is going to finally land a Masters green jacket this week, he might need some putting advice from his 4-year-old daughter. Take a look as Poppy stole the show on the par 3 contest at Augusta National. That's one way to make your dad proud. Now, a reminder of our top stories. Hopes of a US stock market surge are dashed as Wall Street's main indexes open lower than the day before. US and Russian officials meet in Turkey for diplomatic talks, but the US says Ukraine is off the agenda. Meanwhile, defence ministers from 30 countries gather at the Coalition of Willing summit as the UK pledges more military support for Ukraine. And freed after 12 years in jail, US citizen Ksenia Karlina is finally home after a prisoner exchange between the US and Russia. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusifora is coming up next, followed by Hadley Gamble's interview with the GOP strategist and former RNC Communications Director Douglas Hayey. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye.